Senator Kennedy, you sit there in your $3 suit, having never worked a real job in your life. And you dare lecture us about infrastructure spending for working families. The venom in Alexandria. Ocasio-Cortez's voice cut through the Senate Budget Committee hearing room like a blade through silk. Camera shutters clicked frantically as the young congresswoman jabbed her finger at the gentleman from Louisiana. Her designer blazer stretching with the force of her gesture. She had come to destroy, to expose, to humiliate the epitome of everything she claimed to oppose. What she didn't know, what nobody in that packed gallery could have guessed, was that John Kennedy had been preparing for this moment for months. Behind his gentle smile and wire-rimmed glasses lay a stack of documents that would transform the hunter into the hunted. In 3 hours, one of them would leave this room in triumph. The other would leave in tears. Their political career in ruins. The war between generations was about to begin. And only one would survive. You represent everything wrong with this institution. AOC's voice echoed off the marble walls as she stood at the witness table. Having been invited as a special expert on infrastructure and working-class needs. While families in your state can't afford insulin, you vote against every program designed to help them. While young people drown in student debt, you protect tax breaks for billionaires. You've never struggled a day in your life. The Senate Budget Committee hearing room had transformed from a routine infrastructure discussion into a coliseum. What was supposed to be a mundane Tuesday morning hearing on highway funding had exploded into political theater when the young congresswoman from New York made her surprise appearance. Senator John Kennedy sat quietly at the dais, his weathered hands folded calmly before him, watching the 34-year-old representative perform for the packed gallery. Behind his wire-rimmed glasses, pale blue eyes tracked every gesture, noted every inflection. He had seen this playbook before. The righteous anger. The personal attacks. The assumption that a southern accent and gray hair meant an easy target. Your Wikipedia page reads like a monument to privilege. AOC continued, her voice rising with each accusation. Oxford University. University of Virginia Law School. Vanderbilt. You've spent your entire life in ivory towers while the people you claim to represent work 3 jobs just to survive. That accent you affect. Everyone knows it's theater. Just like everything else about your carefully crafted image. In the gallery, young progressive activists erupted in applause. They had come to see their champion eviscerate another out-of-touch conservative, to witness the future defeating the past. Social media was already ablaze with clips of AOC destroying the senator from Louisiana. Kennedy slowly reached for his microphone, the gentle movement somehow commanding attention. When he spoke, his voice carried the unhurried cadence of a man who had learned long ago that volume and velocity were poor substitutes for precision. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. He began his Louisiana draw, wrapping around each word like morning mist on the bayou. I want to thank you for accepting our invitation to discuss infrastructure. Your passion for working families is evident, and I appreciate young people who care deeply about their communities. The compliment seemed to catch AOC off guard. She had expected defensiveness, anger, the usual Republican counterattacks. Instead, Kennedy was smiling at her with what appeared to be genuine warmth. You've made some interesting observations about my background. Kennedy continued, adjusting his glasses with deliberate care. And you're right that I've been blessed with educational opportunities. Would you like to know how I afforded them? Without waiting for an answer, Kennedy began. My daddy sold insurance door in small Louisiana towns. Not the fancy kind, burial insurance. Mostly the kind where you collect premiums 50 cents at a time. My mother taught 8th grade at the public school, dealing with students everyone else had given up on. We lived in a house with 1 bathroom and no central air conditioning in Louisiana summers. He paused, letting the words sink in. I started my first job at 13 throwing newspapers before dawn so I could save money for college. When I got to Vanderbilt, I worked in the cafeteria serving food to classmates who probably never noticed the kid in the hare. At Oxford, I was there on a Rhodes Scholarship, which, as I'm sure you know, is based on merit, not wealth. The gallery had grown quiet. This wasn't the narrative they had expected. But, Congresswoman, Kennedy continued, his voice taking on a slightly sharper edge. Since we're discussing authenticity and understanding working people, I took the liberty of reviewing your background as well. You attended Boston University, a private institution that currently costs about $8 per year. You grew up not in the Bronx, as you often imply, but in Yorktown Heights. Median household income, $96. One of the wealthiest areas in New York State. AOC's face flushed. My family struggled. I'm sure they did. Kennedy interrupted gently. Most families do. But struggle is relative, isn't it? You see, I've actually read your financial disclosures. Ms. Ocasio-Cortez. All of them. Would you like to discuss what they reveal about authentic representation of working people? The sudden shift in dynamics was palpable. Committee members leaned forward. Reporters stopped texting and started paying attention. In the gallery, the cheering had stopped entirely. Kennedy reached beneath his desk and produced a manila folder thick with documents. Then another. Then a third. He arranged them carefully before him, each movement deliberate and theatrical in its own way. You accused me of theater, he said softly, but theater requires an audience. And I'm afraid your audience is about to learn who's really been performing for them. AOC's defensive posture was immediate and telling. Her shoulders tensed, her hands gripped the witness table. And for the first time since her dramatic entrance, she looked uncertain. I came here to discuss infrastructure. She began. So did I, Kennedy replied. But you chose to make this personal. You questioned my integrity, my authenticity, my right to represent working people. That's fine, but if we're going to have that conversation, let's have it with all the facts on the table. He opened the first folder with the care of a surgeon preparing for a delicate operation. Since you're so passionate about fighting for working families against the excesses of the wealthy, let's start with your attendance at the 2021 Met Gala. I believe you wore a dress that said, "Tax the rich." Very clever. Do you remember that evening? The blood drained from AOC's face. She had walked into a trap and everyone in the room suddenly knew it. Senator John Kennedy, the gentleman from Louisiana with the theatrical accent and gentle demeanor, had been waiting for this moment. And he was just getting started. Senator, I don't see how that's relevant to infrastructure. Oh, but it is, Kennedy said, his smile never wavering. Because infrastructure isn't just about roads and bridges. It's about trust. It's about the foundation of credibility upon which public servants build their ability to serve. And Congresswoman, I'm afraid your foundation has some serious cracks. The hunter had indeed become the hunted. And the blood in the water was her own. The Met Gala, Kennedy repeated, savoring each word like a slyer. Describing a particularly complex wine. September 13, 2021, a Monday evening. While many of your constituents were working their second jobs or putting their children to bed, you were attending one of the most exclusive events in American high society. He lifted a large photograph from his folder, holding it up for the cameras. There was AOC resplendent in a white gown with "Tax the Rich" emblazoned in red across the back. Smiling among celebrities and billionaires. The ticket to that event costs $35. Kennedy continued his voice, maintaining its conversational tone. That's more than many of your constituents in the Bronx make in an entire year. The dress you wore, designed by Aurora James of Brothers, had an estimated value of $15. The jewelry, shoes, and accessories added another $12,000. All told, you wore approximately $62 worth of luxury goods while mingling with the very people you claim to oppose. The dress was borrowed, AOC interjected, her voice climbing defensively. I was making a political statement about yes. Let's discuss borrowing. Kennedy interrupted smoothly, pulling out another document. This is from the House Ethics Committee investigation into your Met Gala attendance. Would you like me to read their findings? Or would you prefer to summarize them yourself? AOC's silence spoke volumes. Kennedy adjusted his glasses and began reading. The committee concludes that Representative Ocasio-Cortez received impermissible gifts associated with her attendance at the Met Gala in 2021. While the representative claimed items were borrowed, she failed to pay vendors for services rendered in a timely manner. He looked up. In fact, according to this report, you didn't pay for the hairstyling, makeup, transportation, and other services until after the Office of Congressional Ethics contacted you about their investigation. The total amount you owed various vendors was, he paused for effect, $123.458. Gasps rippled through the gallery. Several progressive activists who had come to support AOC were now staring at their phones, apparently fact-checking in real time. But here's what really interests me. Kennedy continued, warming to his theme. while you were accumulating six figures in unpaid bills for a luxury event. I received this letter. He produced a handwritten note on lined paper. This is from Maria Santos, a seamstress in your district. Would you like me to read it? AOC's jaw tightened. But she remained silent. Dear Senator Kennedy. He read, his voice softening with genuine emotion. I am writing to you because my own representative won't help me. I work 60 hours a week doing alterations and custom sewing. My son needs surgery, and even with insurance, the bills are crushing us. I wrote to Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez 3 times asking for help navigating the healthcare system. I never got a response. Then I saw her on TV in that fancy dress at that rich people's party. She says she fights for us, but she lives like them. Please, someone needs to know the truth. Kennedy carefully folded the letter and set it aside. Maria Santos makes $32 a year doing the same kind of work that created your Met Gala dress. But she pays her bills on time. This is a smear campaign. AOC protested weakly. These are right-wing talking points designed to is the House Ethics Committee part of a right-wing conspiracy? Kennedy asked mildly. Because I have their full report right here, including this interesting detail about your partner, Mr. Riley Roberts. It says here he received. Let me find the exact quote. A bow tie and shoes in advance of the event. Value $892. Also unpaid until the investigation began. The young congresswoman's carefully crafted image was crumbling in real time. Her face had gone from flushed to pale. Her confident posture replaced by something approaching panic. But wait, Kennedy said, lifting another document. There's more. This is an invoice from the makeup artist who worked on you for the Met Gala. $2,500 for services rendered. It shows here that payment was due within 30 days. Do you know when this was actually paid? AOC remained silent. 478 days later, Kennedy answered his own question. Only after the ethics investigation began. The hairstylist waited 436 days. The transportation company providing services to working-class drivers waited 52 days. He leaned back slightly, letting the numbers hang in the air. You know what we call that in Louisiana, theft of services. But in Washington, apparently, it's just another Monday night at the Met Gala. The committee room had become utterly silent, except for the scratch of reporters' pens and the quiet whir of cameras. Several Democratic members were studiously avoiding eye contact with everyone while Republicans struggled to maintain neutral expressions despite their obvious satisfaction. But Congresswoman Kennedy continued, his voice taking on an almost fatherly tone. What troubles me most isn't the money. It's the hypocrisy. You stood there in a dress that said, tax the rich while owing six figures to working people. You preach about inequality while living a lifestyle your constituents can't even imagine. You claim to represent the struggling masses while attending the most elite gathering in America. He pulled out one final item from the Met Gala folder. A printed screenshot. This is your tweet from that night. You wrote, "The medium is the message." Well, Congresswoman, you were right. The message was crystal clear: rules for thee, but not for me. AOC's hands were now visibly trembling as she gripped the witness table. The young activists in the gallery who had come to see their hero destroy the establishment were instead witnessing her exposure as just another politician seduced by power and privilege. Senator, these attacks on my character. I'm not attacking your character. Kennedy interrupted gently. I'm simply presenting facts, documents, invoices, ethics committee findings. If the truth feels like an attack, perhaps you should examine why. He closed the Met Gala folder with deliberate finality. But we're just getting started. Congresswoman, you wanted to discuss authenticity and representing working people. Let's talk about your campaign finance practices. I think your constituents would be very interested in learning where their donations actually went. As Kennedy reached for his second folder, AOC's chief of staff could be seen urgently whispering in her ear, likely advising her to find a way to end this disaster. But there was no escape. She had initiated this confrontation, and now she would have to endure its consequences. The revolution was being televised. All right, it just wasn't the revolution she had planned. Senator Kennedy opened his second folder with the meticulous care of an archaeologist unearthing ancient artifacts. Since you're so concerned about corruption and corporate influence, Congresswoman, let's examine your own campaign finance practices. I find them illuminating. He produced a thick stack of Federal Election Commission documents, each page marked with colored tabs. These are FEC reports filed by your campaign and associated political action committees. The patterns they reveal are fascinating. AOC shifted uncomfortably in her seat. My campaign has always been transparent. Has it? Kennedy interrupted his eyebrows, rising above his wire-rimmed glasses. Let's discuss brand new Congress PE and Justice Democrats PAC. Are you familiar with these organizations? Of course. They helped recruit and support progressive candidates, including yourself, Kennedy noted. In fact, according to these documents, your former chief of staff, Saikat Chakrabarti, founded and controlled both PACs while simultaneously running your campaign. Is that accurate? AOC's pause was telling. Saikat was committed to progressive change. I'm sure he was. Kennedy agreed amiably. Committed to the tune of $885 that flowed from these PACs to limited liability companies. He also controlled Brand New Campaign LLC and Brand New Congress LLC. Do you know what these companies did with that money? The Congresswoman's silence stretched uncomfortably long. Neither does anyone else. Kennedy continued, because unlike PACs, LLCs don't have to disclose their expenditures. Mr. Chakrabarti created a perfect black box. Money goes in, nobody knows where it comes out. The FEC filings list these payments as strategic consulting. Nearly $1 million worth of strategic consulting with no details. No accountability. No transparency. He pulled out a highlighted page. But here's where it gets really interesting. Your campaign, the one that famously refused corporate PAC money, was simultaneously paying these same LLCs for services. So money was flowing from PACs to LLCs to your campaign. All controlled by the same person. In banking, we call that money laundering. In politics, apparently you call it strategic consulting. These are baseless accusations. AOC began, but Kennedy was already moving to his next document. Let's talk about your boyfriend. Excuse me, your partner, Mr. Riley Roberts. Kennedy's tone remained conversationally pleasant. According to these FEC records, Brand New Congress PAC paid Mr. Roberts $6 in 2017. 2 payments of $3 each. The filings list this as marketing consultant fees. He looked up at AOC over his glasses. Can you tell the committee what marketing experience Mr. Roberts had at that time? AOC's face had gone from pale to ashen. Riley is a web developer who. Yes, I have his LinkedIn profile right here. Kennedy interrupted, producing a printout. Education. Bachelor's in Sociology and Finance. Work experience. Web developer. UX designer. No marketing experience listed. No marketing portfolio. No marketing clients except apparently your campaign. He leaned forward slightly. So what exactly did Mr. Roberts market for that $6? He helped with social media strategy. And I see. Kennedy nodded thoughtfully. And did you report this relationship to the FEC? Because federal law requires campaigns to disclose when payments are made to family members, or he paused delicately. Romantic partners. The trap was closing and everyone in the room could feel it. Several reporters were typing furiously on their phones, likely filing breaking news alerts about the unfolding scandal. But wait, Kennedy said, returning to his documents. There's more. This is a complaint filed by the Foundation for Accountability and Civic Trust. It notes that your campaign reported over $10 in credit card expenditures with no itemization. Just card payment to American Express. No details about what was purchased from whom or for what purpose. He produced another document. Here's one example. $3.700 to someone named Juan D. Gonzalez for training. What kind of training? AOC remained silent. And here $850 to Bombazo Dance Company. Was your campaign organizing a dance recital? Those were legitimate expenses, for I'm sure they were legitimate to you. Kennedy interrupted gently. But the law requires more than your personal assessment. It requires documentation, itemization, transparency, all the things you demand from others, but apparently excuse for yourself. He pulled out a new set of papers. This is particularly interesting. Text messages obtained by investigators between you and Mr. Chakrabarti. Would you like me to read them? AOC's attorney, who had been sitting behind her, suddenly leaned forward to whisper urgently in her ear. She shook her head slightly. Kennedy continued. Anyway, Mr. Chakrabarti writes, don't worry about the FEC rules. We've got the LLCs to handle everything. Technically legal is still legal. Your response? As long as we're covered. The revolution won't be stopped by paperwork. The quote hung in the air like an indictment. In the gallery, several young progressives who had come to support AOC were now heading quietly for the exits. Their faith visibly shaken. The revolution won't be stopped by paperwork. Kennedy repeated slowly. In other words, the rules you demand everyone else follow are just obstacles to your agenda. How very establishment of you. He wasn't finished. Let's discuss the dance classes. Your most recent FEC report shows 3,700 lured in payments for training that the House Ethics Committee suspects were actually dance lessons. Personal dance lessons paid for with campaign funds. That's a complete mischaracterization, is it? Kennedy pulled out a receipt. This is from the dance studio's records. Private salsa lessons for a Ocasio-Cortez paid by a campaign credit card. While we're discussing this, Maria Santos, remember her, the seamstress from your district. She can't afford dance lessons for her daughter. But your campaign donors unwittingly funded yours. AOC's composure finally cracked. These are right-wing smears taken out of context. Context. Kennedy's voice rose slightly for the first time. The context is that you've created exactly the kind of shadowy campaign finance structure you claim to oppose. You rail against dark money while funneling hundreds of thousands through untraceable LLCs. You attack others for lack of transparency while refusing to itemize your own expenses. You claim to fight for working people while using their donations for personal luxuries. He closed the folder with an air of finality. You know what troubles me most, Congresswoman? It's not the possible violations of campaign finance law, though those are serious. It's not even the hypocrisy, though that's staggering. It's that you've betrayed the very people who believed in you. They donated $5 and $10 at a time because they thought you were different. And you treated their trust like a personal piggy bank. The transformation in the hearing room was complete. What had begun as AOC's triumphant attack on establishment corruption had become a methodical exposure of her own ethical failures. The young revolutionaries in the gallery who remained looked shell-shocked, their phones capturing their hero's demise in real time. We're going to take a 5-minute recess, the committee chairman announced, recognizing that the hearing had reached a natural breaking point. When we return, Senator Kennedy, you may continue your questioning. As AOC stood on unsteady legs, gathering her papers with trembling hands, Kennedy called out gently, Congresswoman, you might want to prepare your response about Amazon. I think your constituents deserve to know the real cost of your victories. The threat was clear. The worst was yet to come. As AOC fled the hearing room, pursued by shouting reporters and abandoned by her progressive allies, one truth had become undeniable. She had awakened a sleeping giant. And he was just getting started. When the hearing reconvened, the gallery had noticeably thinned. Many of AOC's young supporters had fled during the recess, unwilling to witness more of their hero's demolition. Those who remained wore expressions of shock and betrayal. The media section, however, had swelled with reporters who smelled blood in the water. Senator Kennedy settled back into his chair with the unhurried grace of a man who knew the hardest work was already done. AOC returned to the witness table looking visibly shaken, her earlier fire extinguished, replaced by the hollow eyes of someone who finally understood the trap they'd walked into. Congresswoman, Kennedy began, his voice returning to its gentle cadence. Let's discuss one of your most celebrated political victories, driving Amazon out of New York City. You called it a triumph for working people. I'd like to explore that characterization. He opened his third folder, this one notably thicker than the others. In November 2018, Amazon announced it would build its second headquarters in Long Island City, Queens, part of your district. Do you remember the details of that proposal? AOC straightened slightly, perhaps sensing safer ground. It was a terrible deal that would have gentrified. Let's stick to numbers first, then discuss interpretations. Kennedy interrupted mildly. According to Amazon's official proposal, and New York State's economic analysis, HQ2 would have created 25,000 jobs with an average salary of $150. Over 10 years, it projected up to 40,000 jobs. Is that accurate? Those numbers were inflated, were they? Kennedy produced a bound report. This is from the New York State Budget Office, not Amazon's projections, New York's own analysis. It confirmed 25,000 direct jobs minimum, plus an estimated 65,000 indirect jobs from construction services and supporting businesses. Total economic impact, $186 billion over 25 years. He looked up at her. You celebrated when this deal died. Do you remember what you tweeted? AOC remained silent. But Kennedy was already pulling out a printed screenshot. Anything is possible today was the day a group of dedicated everyday New Yorkers defeated Amazon's corporate greed, its worker exploitation, and the power of the richest man in the world. He set the paper down carefully. You were very proud. I was fighting against corporate welfare. Let's examine that, Kennedy said, producing another document. The incentives offered to Amazon totaled $3 billion. But that wasn't cash. It was tax breaks contingent on job creation. Amazon only got the breaks if they created the jobs. Meanwhile, the projected tax revenue to New York was $27.5 billion over 25 years. That's a 9-to-1 return on investment. You killed a deal that would have netted New York $24.5 billion in additional revenue. He paused to let the math sink in. Money that could have funded schools, healthcare care, housing, all the programs you claimed to support. But you were too busy celebrating to do the math. The community didn't want the community. Kennedy's eyebrows rose. Let me share what your actual constituent said. He pulled out a tablet and connected it to the hearing room's display system. These are video testimonials recorded last month from residents of your district. I think the committee should hear directly from them. The screen filled with the image of a middle-aged Latino man in a construction union jacket. My name is Miguel Suarez. I'm a union electrician in Queens. When Amazon pulled out, my union lost 1,500 projected jobs. Good union jobs with benefits. My son just graduated from trade school. He was going to get hired. Now he's working 2 part-time jobs with no benefits. AOC cost my family our future. The video shifted to a black woman in her 30s. I'm Denise Williams. I own a small catering business in Long Island City. When Amazon announced they were coming, I started planning to expand. I hired more people. Took out a loan for new equipment. Then AOC drove them away. I had to lay off workers and nearly lost my business. She celebrated while we suffered. Another testimonial began. An elderly Korean man who owned a dry cleaning shop. Amazon employees would have been my customers. I was going to finally retire, sell my business. Now nobody wants to buy it. My grandchildren ask why I still work at 74. I tell them ask AOC. Kennedy paused the video. Would you like to see more? I have dozens. AOC's face had gone from pale to gray. Her hands clutched the table edge as if it were the only thing keeping her upright. But those are just anecdotes. Kennedy continued. Let's look at data. He produced a chart. Unemployment in Long Island City up 47% since Amazon departed. Small business closures up 32%. Commercial real estate vacancies up 58%. Your district is economically devastated. And you're still tweeting about your victory. He pulled out another document. This is a letter from the New York Building and Construction Trades Council. Representative Ocasio-Cortez's actions cost our members an estimated 11,000 construction jobs. These are union jobs with good wages and benefits. Her ideological crusade against Amazon hurt the very workers she claims to champion. They're lying, are they? Kennedy's voice remained calm. Here's another letter. This one from the Retail Wholesale and Department Store Union. They were prepared to organize Amazon workers. Your actions cost them the opportunity to unionize 25,000 new members. You didn't defeat corporate power. You protected it from union organization. He returned to the video display. A young Latina woman appeared on screen, tears visible on her face. My name is Carmen Rodriguez. I'm a single mother of 2. I have a computer science degree. But I'm stocking shelves at Target because there are no tech jobs in Queens. Amazon would have hired me. I could have afforded to move out of my mom's apartment. AOC stole my children's future because she wanted to score political points. She doesn't care about us. She only cares about her Twitter followers. The testimony was devastating, not just for its content, but for its raw emotion. These weren't political operatives or corporate shills. They were real people from AOC's district whose lives had been tangibly damaged by her actions. Kennedy let the silence stretch before continuing. But here's what really puzzles me. Congresswoman, while you were killing jobs in Queens, let's look at your own employment practices. He pulled out another document. This is your congressional staff payroll. Your chief of staff, before he resigned amid the campaign finance scandal, was paid $80. The maximum congressional staff salary is $180. Why did you cap it? AOC found her voice, though it was noticeably weaker. To promote pay equity. Pay equity, Kennedy repeated thoughtfully. So, you artificially suppress the wages of your most skilled employees. Your chief of staff with a degree from Harvard made less than a first-year Amazon programmer would have. Your legislative director responsible for all policy work made $65. An Amazon warehouse worker with overtime would have earned more. He leaned forward. You imposed socialist wage controls on your own staff while denying your constituents the opportunity to earn capitalist wages at Amazon. The irony is breathtaking. Those jobs would have displaced. Let's talk about displacement. Kennedy interrupted. Do you know what's displaced your constituents? Poverty, hopelessness, lack of opportunity. You protected them from $150 jobs and condemned them to $15 a retail work. If that's progressive victory, I'd hate to see defeat. He pulled out one final item from the Amazon folder. A photograph. This is from your victory party. February 14, 2019. You're popping champagne with activists while celebrating Amazon's withdrawal. Champagne that cost, according to the receipt, $247 a bottle. Paid for by your campaign. The same campaign that couldn't properly report its expenses. The photo was damning AOC laughing, champagne glass raised high, surrounded by celebrating activists. The contrast with the testimonials of struggling constituents was stark and devastating. You know what Maria Santos was doing that night? Kennedy asked quietly. The seamstress who can't get you to return her calls. She was working her third job cleaning offices. One of those offices was scheduled to be renovated for Amazon workers. That renovation was cancelled. She lost that cleaning job 2 months later. AOC's composure finally shattered completely. A single tear rolled down her cheek. Her carefully applied makeup beginning to run. The strong, defiant woman who had entered the hearing room 2 hours earlier was gone. Replaced by someone confronting the human cost of their ideology for perhaps the first time. 25,000 jobs. Kennedy summarized, his voice heavy with genuine sadness. 65,000 indirect jobs. 27 billion in tax revenue. Countless dreams destroyed. Small businesses shuttered. Families struggling. All so you could trend on Twitter and build your political brand on their suffering. He closed the folder slowly. You asked about infrastructure. Congresswoman, you destroyed your district's economic infrastructure and celebrated on its ruins. That's not progressivism. That's narcissism with a political science degree. The hearing room sat in stunned silence. Even the Republicans on the committee looked uncomfortable with the complete destruction they were witnessing. This had transcended partisan politics and become something more profound. A public reckoning with the human cost of performative politics. As Kennedy reached for his next folder, AOC's attorney stood up. Senator, could we request a brief recess? My client needs a moment. Kennedy's expression softened slightly. Of course, but when we return, we need to discuss your client's stance on environmental issues. I think the committee will be very interested in her travel records. As AOC stood to leave, her legs visibly unsteady, the remaining gallery erupted with questions from reporters. But she didn't turn, didn't respond. She simply fled, leaving behind the shattered remnants of her political image. The revolution hadn't just been televised. It had been autopsied, revealing the hollow core beneath the rhetoric. And there were still 3 more folders on Kennedy's desk. The recess stretched to 30 minutes as AOC's team desperately tried to regroup. When the hearing finally reconvened, she looked like a different person. Her confident blazer was wrinkled, her perfect makeup smeared and hastily reapplied. Most tellingly, the fire in her eyes had been replaced by something approaching fear. Senator Kennedy waited patiently for everyone to settle, then reached for his 4th folder with the same methodical precision he'd displayed throughout the hearing. Congresswoman, you're one of the lead sponsors of the Green New Deal. You've called climate change an existential crisis requiring immediate dramatic action. Is that correct? AOC's voice was barely above a whisper. Yes. Louder, please. For the record. Yes, she repeated slightly stronger. Climate change is the defining issue of our generation. I agree. It's a serious issue. Kennedy nodded. Which is why I found your travel record so interesting. He produced a bound report. This is a compilation of your travel between January 2021 and December 2023. Assembled from public records, social media posts, and flight tracking data. Would you like to guess how many flights you took? AOC remained silent. 137 flights. Kennedy announced. In 3 years. That's almost 1 flight per week. But here's the really interesting part. 47 of those were on private jets. Gasps echoed through the hearing room. Even some Democrats looked shocked. Private jets? Kennedy repeated, savoring the words. The most carbon-intensive form of travel available. A single private jet flight from D.C. to New York. A trip you made 23 times. Produces more carbon than the average American generates in 2 months. He pulled out a detailed spreadsheet. Let's examine some of these trips. March 15, 2022. Private jet from D.C. to New York for a climate rally. You gave a speech about the need for sacrifice. Then flew private back to D.C. the same day. Commercial flights run that route every hour. But apparently they weren't convenient enough for the climate champion. AOC tried to mount a defense. Those trips were necessary for necessary. Kennedy interrupted. April 7, 2023. Private jet to Miami for a Democratic fundraiser. Not a climate event. Not constituent service. A cocktail party with donors. April 9. Private jet back, but with a stop in Atlanta for another fundraiser. Your carbon footprint for that weekend exceeded that of a small African village for a year. He produced another document. This is fascinating. Your 2022 Earth Day speech where you said, and I quote, "We need to be honest about the sacrifices required. Flying less, driving less, consuming less. Our planet depends on it." You gave that speech on April 22. On April 24, you took a private jet to Los Angeles for a podcast appearance. The podcast was about climate change. The irony was so thick it could be cut with a knife. In the gallery, several young climate activists who had remained looked physically ill. But let's discuss your ground transportation. Kennedy continued pulling out another report. Your campaign and congressional office spent $32.847 on Uber and Lyft in 2022 alone. You live and work in cities with extensive public transportation. The New York subway, the DC metro systems you've praised as examples of sustainable infrastructure. Yet you took 142 car service rides. He looked up at her. Do you know what your constituents call the subway? Their only option. While you're taking Ubers, they're crowding onto delayed trains. But at least they're actually practicing what you preach. Security concerns sometimes require security. Kennedy's eyebrows rose. This receipt is for an Uber from your apartment to a Whole Foods 2 blocks away. Were you afraid someone might attack you in the organic produce section? He pulled out his tablet again. Let me show you something. This is a carbon footprint calculator. Based on your flight records and ground transportation. Your personal carbon footprint for 2022 was. He typed numbers. 247 metric tons of CO2. The average American produces 16 tons. You personally generated as much carbon as 15 average Americans while lecturing them about their pickup trucks and hamburgers. The calculator remained on screen. The number glowing like an accusation 200 tons. But surely you offset this somehow. Kennedy continued. Do you purchase carbon credits? Silence. Do you invest in renewable energy projects? More silence. Have you installed solar panels on your DC apartment? Renters can't always. But you're not a typical renter. Are you? Kennedy interrupted. You're a member of Congress with a platform and resources. If you can't figure out how to live sustainably, how can you expect a single mother working 2 jobs to do it? He returned to his documents. Let's examine the Green New Deal's economics since we're discussing it. Your resolution calls for net zero carbon emissions by 2030. The estimated cost, and this is from multiple economic analyses, not fossil fuel propaganda, is $93 trillion over 10 years. Kennedy pulled out his phone calculator, making a show of computing. There are roughly 150 million households in America. 93 trillion divided by 150 million equals. He showed the screen to the cameras. $620 per household. That's what your plan costs every American family. $620. Those numbers are inflated by, are they? Kennedy challenge. Then give us your numbers. You've been promoting this plan for 5 years. Surely you have a detailed cost analysis. What's your estimate? AOC's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. You don't know, do you? Kennedy's voice turned professorial. You're asking American families to spend 20 years of income on a plan you can't even price. That's not leadership. That's fantasy with a congressional resolution number. He pulled out another document. But let's look at your personal commitment to renewable energy. This is your financial disclosure form. Do you own any renewable energy investments? Solar companies, wind power, battery technology. My investments are in index funds. Index funds, Kennedy repeated, which include fossil fuel companies. You literally profit from the industry you claim is destroying the planet. The same financial disclosure shows you own between $15 and $50 in funds that include ExxonMobil, Chevron, and BP. He leaned back, letting the hypocrisy sink in. So you fly private jets, take 1,000 Uber rides, invest in oil companies, and can't price your own legislation. But you want working families to sacrifice their livelihoods for your environmental vision. Do I have that right? AOC's response was barely audible. The systemic change required. Systemic change starts with personal responsibility. Kennedy interrupted. At least that's what you tweeted last Earth Day. But apparently that only applies to other people. He pulled out one final document from the climate folder. This is an email from Greta Thunberg's team declining your invitation to a joint event. Would you like me to read their reason? AOC's eyes widened in genuine panic. They write, while we appreciate Representative Ocasio-Cortez's public support for climate action, we cannot partner with someone whose personal choices so starkly contradict their public positions. Authentic climate advocacy requires living the change we seek. The rejection from the world's most famous climate activist was the final nail in the coffin. Even Greta Thunberg had recognized AOC as a fraud. You know what really bothers me? Kennedy said, his voice dropping to an almost conversational tone. It's not the hypocrisy, though that's staggering. It's that you're making environmental protection a partisan joke. Every time you fly private to a climate conference, you give ammunition to those who deny the problem exists. You're not helping the environment. You're hurting it by making climate action look like elitist pining. He closed the folder with finality. My grandson asked me why some people don't believe in climate change. I told him it's partly because the loudest advocates often have the biggest carbon footprints. He's 12 and even he understands that actions matter more than words. AOC sat in complete defeat. Her revolutionary armor shattered beyond repair. The woman who had entered the hearing room as the voice of a generation had been exposed as just another politician saying whatever it took to build her brand. One more topic, Kennedy said quietly, reaching for another folder. Your district. The people you claim to represent while you're jet-setting to podcasts and fundraisers. I think we need to discuss what's actually happening in the Bronx and Queens while you're tweeting about revolution. If AOC thought it couldn't get worse, she was about to learn otherwise. The complete destruction of her political image was entering its final phase. Senator Kennedy's fifth folder was noticeably worn, as if he'd spent considerable time studying its contents. When he opened it, the weight of evidence inside seemed to press down on the room like a physical force. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez. He began his Louisiana draw, carrying an undertone of genuine sadness. You represent New York's 14th district, parts of the Bronx and Queens. Some of the most vibrant, hard-working communities in America. Let's discuss what's happened to them under your representation. He pulled out a series of charts and graphs. Crime statistics from the NYPD. In 2018, when you were elected, your district had 1.247 reported violent crimes. In 2023, that number was 837. That's a 47% increase. Your constituents are literally less safe since you took office. Crime is a complex issue that everything's complex when you don't want to take responsibility. Kennedy interrupted, but let's look at specific examples. This is a police report from last month. Mrs. Chen, aged 71, robbed at knife point outside her apartment building in Jackson Heights. The same building where she's lived for 40 years. She wrote to your office begging for help with public safety. Would you like to see your staff's response? He held up a form letter. Thank you for contacting our office. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez is committed to reimagining public safety through community-based alternatives to policing. That's what you sent to a 71-year-old robbery victim. Not help. Not compassion. A form letter about reimagining while she's afraid to leave her apartment. Kennedy produced another document. Business licenses in your district. In 2018, there were 12,456 active small businesses. Today, 9,032. You've lost over 2.600 small businesses. 21% gone. These aren't statistics. Their family dreams destroyed. He pulled out a tablet again. Let me show you some of those dreamers. The screen filled with a middle-aged Dominican man standing in front of an empty storefront. I'm Roberto Fernandez. I owned this restaurant for 15 years. When the congresswoman pushed for higher minimum wage, I tried to make it work. But with fewer customers after Amazon left and higher costs, I couldn't survive. I laid off 12 employees before closing. Those were 12 families I failed because politicians don't understand math. Another video began an elderly Jewish woman in obvious distress. My name is Ruth Goldstein. My family has run this kosher bakery since 1962. After the congresswoman's anti-Israel statements, we started getting threats. Vandalism. She never condemned it. Never helped us. We closed last month. 60 years of tradition gone. Kennedy paused the video. That brings us to another issue. Your district has one of the largest Jewish populations in New York. Yet you've consistently voted against Israel, aligned with anti-Semitic colleagues, and created an environment where your Jewish constituents feel abandoned. This is a letter from the Queens Jewish Community Council. He read Ocasio-Cortez has failed to represent the interests and safety of her Jewish constituents. Her rhetoric has emboldened anti-Semitic elements, leading to increased incidents of harassment and violence. We no longer consider her an ally of our community. That's a complete mischaracterization, is it? Kennedy pulled out another document. These are police reports of anti-Semitic incidents in your district. 2018 37 reported incidents. 2023-119, a 222% increase. Your Jewish constituents are being harassed, assaulted and driven from their businesses while you align yourself with those who question Israel's right to exist. He returned to the video display. A young Hiddick man appeared on screen. The congresswoman doesn't care about Jews. She cares about Twitter likes from her progressive friends. My daughter was spit on walking to school. Where was AOC posting about Palestine? Kennedy let that sink in before continuing. But let's discuss your most famous moment regarding crime and safety. January 6, 2021. You gave dramatic testimony about fearing for your life during the Capitol riot. Very moving. Except he pulled out a building schematic. You weren't in the Capitol. The diagram clearly showed the Capitol complex. Kennedy pointed to the iconic dome. This is where the breach occurred. The House chamber is here. Your office. He pointed to a completely different building is in the Cannon building, connected by underground tunnels. But a completely separate structure. No rioters entered your building. I was still terrified. I'm sure you were. Kennedy said gently. Fear is natural in uncertain situations. But you told a story about hiding in your bathroom. Convinced you were about to die. You gave interviews describing your terror as insurrectionists hunted for you. The problem is, he produced another document. This is the security log from the Cannon building. No unauthorized entries. No breaches. No threats. He pulled up video footage. This is you from security cameras at 2:47 p.m. on January 6 during the height of the riot. You're walking calmly through the Cannon building hallway. Checking your phone. Does this look like someone in mortal terror? The footage was damning. While AOC had told the world she was hiding in fear for her life. The video showed her strolling through empty hallways, completely safe in a building where no threats existed. You manufactured a dramatic narrative for political gain. Kennedy said simply. You appropriated the genuine fear of those actually in danger to build your brand. That's not just dishonest. It's stolen valor of a different kind. He returned to his district statistics. While you were building your national profile with manufactured drama, your constituents were facing real danger. Violent crime up 47%. Businesses closing. Anti-Semitic attacks tripling. But you were too busy becoming famous to notice. I've fought for my district. Have you? Kennedy challenge. When was the last time you held an in-person town hall? Not a Facebook Live or Instagram story. An actual town hall where constituents could ask questions. Silence. I'll tell you. Kennedy continued. August 2019. Over 4 years ago. You've abandoned the very people who elected you for the adoration of Twitter followers who can't vote in your district. He pulled out a final document. This is a survey of your constituents conducted last month by Siena College. Not a partisan poll and academic institution. 64% say you're more focused on national attention than district needs. 71% say you're rarely visible in the community. 52% say they regret voting for you. The numbers hung in the air like a funeral shroud over AOC's political career. You know what breaks my heart? Kennedy said, his voice heavy with genuine emotion. Your district is full of immigrants who came here with nothing and built something. They believed in you because you looked like them, sounded like them. You betrayed that trust for retweets and magazine covers. He gestured to the evidence spread before him. Crime up, businesses closed, communities divided, jobs destroyed, all while you chase cameras and private jets. That's not representation, that's exploitation. AOC's tears were flowing freely now, her makeup running in dark streams down her cheeks. The strong, confident woman who had launched this confrontation was completely broken. We have one more topic to cover, Kennedy said quietly, reaching for his final folder. Your academic record and qualifications, because I think the American people deserve to know exactly who's been lecturing them about economics and policy. The final demolition was about to begin and everyone in the room knew there would be nothing left of AOC's political image when it was over. Senator Kennedy opened his final folder with the solemnity of a priest conducting last rites. The committee room, already heavy with the weight of 5 hours of devastating revelations, seemed to hold its collective breath. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he began, adjusting his glasses one last time. You've built your political career on claiming expertise in economics and international relations. You lecture CEOs about business, senators about policy, and the American people about economic theory. I think it's time we examined your actual qualifications. He produced an official-looking document. This is your transcript from Boston University obtained through the Family Educational Rights and Privacy Act with proper authorization. You graduated cum laude with a degree in economics and international relations. Impressive. Shall we look at the details? AOC's attorney started to object, but she waved him off with a defeated gesture. There was no point in fighting anymore. Let's start with your economics courses. Kennedy continued running his finger down the transcript. Principles of Microeconomics. B. Principles of Macroeconomics C plus Intermediate Microeconomic Theory CE Statistical Analysis D. He looked up. You got a D in statistics. Yet you cite statistics constantly. How does that work without waiting for an answer? He continued. Economic Development. C. Public Finance say. But here's my favorite. You failed econometrics. Failed. Had to retake it. Second attempt D plus. The gallery stirred with whispers. The woman who had proposed reshaping the entire American economy had barely passed basic economics courses. Your international relations grades weren't much better. Kennedy noted comparative politics see international political economy say. And you withdrew from advanced economic theory entirely. Couldn't handle it. Grades don't reflect. You're right, Kennedy interrupted. Grades don't reflect everything, but they do reflect understanding of basic concepts. And according to your professor. He pulled out another document. Dr. Michael Pearson wrote in his final evaluation. Ms. Ocasio shows enthusiasm but lacks fundamental understanding of economic principles. She frequently confuses correlation with causation and shows no aptitude for quantitative analysis. Kennedy set the transcript aside. But let's test your knowledge directly. Simple question. What's the Laffer curve? AOC's mouth opened and closed without sound. It's a basic concept in tax policy. Kennedy explained patiently. Shows the relationship between tax rates and tax revenue. You advocate for 70% tax rates but don't know the fundamental theory behind optimal taxation. He didn't wait for an answer. Let's try another. What's the difference between monetary and fiscal policy? More silence. These are economics 1 questions. Kennedy said, his voice mixing disappointment with incredulity. You sit on the Financial Services Committee. You propose multi-trillion-dollar legislation and you can't answer undergraduate-level questions. He pulled out a calculator. Let's do some basic math. Your Green New Deal costs $93 trillion. The current U.S. GDP is $25 trillion. How many years of total economic output would your plan cost? AOC stared at the calculator as if it were a foreign object. Kennedy did the math himself. 3.72 years. Your plan would cost almost 4 years of everything America produces. Every car, every house, every hamburger, every movie ticket, everything for nearly 4 years. Did you know that when you proposed it, the financing mechanisms would what financing mechanisms? Kennedy pressed. You've had 5 years to explain how to pay for it. Show me the math. Show me any math. The request hung in the air unanswered because there was no answer. AOC had never done the math, never understood the economics, never grasped the magnitude of what she proposed. But here's what really puzzles me. Kennedy continued pulling out another document. This is your senior thesis. The impact of microfinance on development in South Asia. Your advisor, Professor Johnson, gave it a C and wrote. Kennedy read from the evaluation. This work shows passion but lacks rigor. The statistical analysis is flawed. The economic theory is misapplied and the conclusions don't follow from the evidence. Ms. Ocasio would benefit from remedial coursework in research methods. He looked up at her. You graduated not because you mastered economics, but because Boston University practices great inflation. You're the participation trophy of economists. The insult delivered in Kennedy's gentle drawl somehow stung more than shouting would have. Let's discuss your work history. Kennedy continued. After graduating with your economics degree, did you work in finance policy analysis? You were a bartender, which is honest work. My nephew tended bar through law school, but he didn't then lecture the Federal Reserve about monetary policy. He pulled out yet another document. This is from your former employer at the coffee shop where you worked before bartending. The manager writes. Sandy, that's what you went by then, was enthusiastic but struggled with basic math. We had to move her from the register to food prep because she kept making errors with change. The revelation that she couldn't handle making change while claiming to understand trillion-dollar policies was devastating in its simplicity. But surely you've educated yourself since college. Kennedy said. What economics books have you read recently? Silence. Can you name any economist besides Keynes or Marx? More silence. Have you ever taken a continuing education course in economics? Attended a seminar? Read a peer-reviewed paper. The questions came like artillery shells, each exploding another part of AOC's intellectual pretensions. You know what? Let's make this really simple, Kennedy said, his voice turning professorial. I'm going to explain a basic economic concept, and you tell me why your policies violate it. Supply and demand curves intersect at the market clearing price. When you artificially raise wages above that price, what happens? AOC's response was barely a whisper. Unemployment, correct? Kennedy exclaimed with exaggerated surprise. So, you do know that your $15 minimum wage causes job losses. Yet, you advocate for it anyway. That's not ignorance. That's malice toward the very people you claim to help. He wasn't done. Let's try another. When you increase corporate taxes, corporations pass those costs to consumers through higher prices. This is called tax incidence. Do you know who pays the highest percentage of their income on consumer goods? The poor. So your corporate tax increases hurt the poor most. Did you know that AOC's tears had returned? But Kennedy pressed on with the relentlessness of a teacher who had finally caught a chronic cheater. Price controls cause shortages. Rent control reduces housing supply. Trade barriers raise consumer prices. These aren't controversial statements. They're economic facts accepted by liberals and conservatives alike. Yet every policy you propose violates basic economic principles that freshmen learn in their first semester. He closed the academic folder with finality. You're not stupid, Congresswoman. Graduating from any university takes some intelligence. But you're economically illiterate. And in Congress, that's like being a surgeon who doesn't understand anatomy. People get hurt. The demolition was complete. But Kennedy had one final point to make. He pulled out a printed tweet. Last week, you tweeted, economics is about people, not numbers. Pretty phrase. But economics is about understanding how numbers affect people. Without the numbers, you're just making wishes. And wishes don't pay rent, create jobs, or feed families. He leaned back in his chair, the exhaustion of the prolonged destruction finally showing on his face. You asked at the beginning why I wear a suit. It's not about privilege or pretension. It's about respect. Respect for this institution. Respect for the people we serve. Respect for the complexity of the problems we're trying to solve. You can't Twitter your way through governance. You can't Instagram economic policy. And you can't fake expertise when real people's lives hang in the balance. AOC sat in complete defeat. Her designer blazer wrinkled and stained with tears. Her perfectly styled hair disheveled. Her makeup destroyed. The transformation from confident attacker to broken defender was total. I have failed, she whispered so quietly the microphones barely caught it. I didn't understand. I thought passion was enough. I thought caring was enough. I am sorry. The admission of failure from someone who had never admitted error before stunned even Kennedy. But he wasn't finished yet. There was still the matter of concluding this devastating hearing. The hearing room fell into an eerie silence following AOC's broken admission of failure. Even the reporters had stopped typing, sensing they were witnessing something beyond mere political theater. A complete psychological unraveling in real time. Senator Kennedy removed his glasses and cleaned them slowly, giving everyone a moment to absorb what had just occurred. When he spoke again, his voice carried the weight of a judge delivering a verdict. Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez, he began, I take no pleasure in what's happened here today. But when you began this hearing by attacking my character, my authenticity, and my right to represent working people, you opened a door that couldn't be closed. He gestured to the evidence spread across his desk folders. Documents, transcripts, videos. Everything we've discussed today was public information. Any journalist could have found it. Any opponent could have exposed it. But they didn't. Do you know why? AOC shook her head mutely, tears still streaming down her face. Because you were useful to them. Kennedy explained. The media loved you because you gave them clicks. The Democratic establishment tolerated you because you energized young voters. Republicans enjoyed you because you made their job easier every time you spoke. You created conservative voters. Everyone had a reason to keep your myth alive. He leaned forward slightly. But myths are dangerous things. Especially in government. When we allow performance to replace competence. When we value tweets over truth. When we celebrate passion while ignoring ignorance. People suffer. Real people. Your constituents. Kennedy began gathering the evidence methodically. Let's summarize what we've learned today. You attended a $35 per ticket gala while owing working people $123. You funneled campaign money through shell companies while denouncing dark money. You killed 25,000 jobs while claiming to fight for workers. You flew private jets while preaching climate austerity. You abandoned your district for fame. You lied about your experiences. And you did it all while lacking the basic knowledge necessary to understand the consequences of your actions. Each point landed like a physical blow. AOC seemed to shrink further into her chair with every word. But here's what's truly unforgivable. Kennedy continued, his voice hardening. You knew. Part of you always knew. Every time you simplified a complex issue into a tweet. Every time you chose a camera over a constituent. Every time you valued being right over doing right. You knew. But the adulation was too intoxicating. The fame too seductive. The power too corrupting. He stood up, something he rarely did during hearings. Young lady, you came here thinking you were David facing Goliath. But you were never David. You were Goliath all along. Powerful, arrogant, convinced of your own righteousness while crushing those beneath you. The difference is today you met your stone. The biblical metaphor hung heavy in the air. Several committee members shifted uncomfortably, perhaps recognizing their own vulnerabilities in AOC's exposure. Senator AOC's voice was barely a whisper. What do I do now? Kennedy's expression softened slightly. That's the first genuine question you've asked all day. What you do now defines whether this was destruction or education. You have two choices. You can leave here, blame everyone else, claim victimhood, and double down on the performance. Or you can do something revolutionary. You can learn. He returned to his seat, suddenly looking every one of his 73 years. Go back to school. And I don't mean that as an insult. Take economics courses. Read books without cameras rolling. Visit your district without posting about it. Listen more than you speak. Learn that governance is about serving others, not yourself. AOC's attorney whispered urgently in her ear, likely advising her to leave. But she waved him off. Senator Kennedy, I want to apologize. Not the political kind of apology. But I'm genuinely sorry for attacking you. For failing my constituents. For everything. It was perhaps the first completely honest moment of her political career. Kennedy nodded slowly. Apologies are good, but actions are better. You've damaged a lot of lives with your ignorance and ambition. You owe those people more than words. The committee chairman, who had watched the entire spectacle in stunned silence, finally found his voice. I think we should conclude this hearing. Unless there are other questions. No one spoke. What else was there to say? They had witnessed a complete political destruction so thorough that even partisan opponents felt uncomfortable. As AOC stood to leave, Kennedy called out one last time. Congresswoman. She turned her face, a mask of ruined makeup and raw emotion. That seamstress from your district, Maria Santos. She still needs help with her son's medical bills. Your office has her contact information. Start there. Start with one person you can actually help instead of millions you can only pretend to save. AOC nodded wordlessly and fled the hearing room. Pursued by shouting reporters she no longer had the strength to face. Her staff scrambled after her. Their own careers likely ended by association with this spectacular fall. As the room emptied, Kennedy remained seated, surrounded by the evidence of destruction he had so methodically deployed. A Republican colleague approached him. John, that was intense. Maybe too intense. Kennedy looked up, his eyes tired behind his wire-rimmed glasses. Son, when someone attacks your integrity, you have two choices. Take it or teach them why they shouldn't have. Today was teaching. But did you have to destroy her so completely? Kennedy considered the question carefully. You know what my daddy told me when I was young? He said, Johnny, if you're going to shoot at the king, you better not miss. She shot at me, thinking I was just some old fool with a funny accent. She missed. I didn't. The colleague nodded and moved away, leaving Kennedy alone with his thoughts. He began packing away the folders, each one representing hours of preparation for a confrontation he hadn't sought, but had been ready for nonetheless. As he prepared to leave, a young reporter approached tentatively. Senator Kennedy, one question. Did you plan all this? Kennedy smiled sadly. Young man, I've been in politics for 40 years. I've learned that when someone comes at you with passion, but no preparation, ideology, but no ideas, feelings, but no facts, they're usually hiding something. All I did was look for what she was hiding. Turns out it was everything. He picked up his briefcase and headed for the door, leaving behind a hearing room that would be remembered as the site of one of the most complete political demolitions in congressional history. Behind him, the lights dimmed on what had begun as AOC's moment of triumph and ended as her professional funeral. The revolution had indeed been televised. It just hadn't ended the way anyone expected. 48 hours later, Senator John Kennedy sat on the porch of his Madisonville home, watching the sunset over the Chaffunkta River. The past 2 days had been a whirlwind of media coverage, with every news outlet in America dissecting what was already being called the hearing heard round the world. His phone hadn't stopped ringing, but he'd turned it off hours ago. There would be time for interviews later. Now he just wanted to think. Inside, his wife, Becky, brought him a glass of sweet tea and settled into the rocking chair beside him. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the evening chorus of crickets and tree frogs providing a soundtrack to their thoughts. You've been quiet, she observed. Been thinking about that young woman, Kennedy admitted, wondering if I went too far. Becky considered this. She came after you pretty hard. John, she did, but she's also young enough to be my granddaughter. Maybe I should have been gentler. Would gentle have taught her anything? Kennedy sipped his tea thoughtfully. Probably not, but watching someone's whole world collapse like that, there's no joy in it. Just sadness at the waste. All that energy, all that passion pointed in the wrong direction. The news from Washington painted a picture of complete political collapse. AOC hadn't tweeted a first in her congressional career. Her staff was reportedly resigning en masse. The Ethics Committee had announced formal investigations into her campaign finances and Met Gala gifts. Progressive organizations were quietly distancing themselves. There were even rumors of a primary challenge from her own district. You know what bothers me most? Kennedy said. It's not her ignorance or even her hypocrisy. It's that she had the platform to do real good. First-generation American young woman of color, genuine connection to working people. She could have been transformative. Instead, she chose performance. Inside the House, the evening news played on low volume. Kennedy could see his own image on the screen, probably replaying highlights from the hearing for the 100th time. He turned away. I got a call from Maria Santos today. Becky mentioned the seamstress from AOC's district. Kennedy looked up sharply. Oh, she wanted to thank you. Said AOC's office finally called her. They're helping with her son's medical bills. Connecting her with programs she didn't know existed. First time in 5 years they've actually helped her with anything. A small smile crossed Kennedy's weathered face. Well, that's something. Maybe that young woman learned something after all. Maybe. They returned to their comfortable silence. But Kennedy's phone buzzed with a text. He almost ignored it, then saw it was from his grandson. Grandpa, I watched the whole hearing in civics class. My teacher says you were too mean. But Sarah Chen says her grandmother is the one who got robbed in AOC's district. And she says, you're a hero. I'm confused. Were you right or wrong? Kennedy smiled and typed back. Both. Probably. Sometimes being right means being hard. But being hard should never mean being cruel. The difference is in why you do it. I wasn't trying to hurt her. I was trying to stop her from hurting others. Is she a bad person? Kennedy thought carefully before responding. No, son. She's a person who got lost. Fame is like sugar. A little makes life sweeter. Too much makes you sick. She got very sick. Maybe now she can get better. As twilight deepened over Louisiana, Kennedy reflected on the larger implications of what had occurred. The hearing had exposed more than just AOC's failures. It had revealed the dangerous disconnect between social media politics and actual governance. Between performative progressivism and genuine public service. His phone rang. The caller ID showed it was President Trump. Kennedy let it go to voicemail. Tomorrow he'd return calls, do interviews, play the Washington game. Tonight was for reflection. You know what my daddy would have said? Kennedy asked Becky. What's that? He'd have said, Johnny, you can shear a sheep many times. But you can only skin it once. That young woman got skinned today. Question is whether she'll grow new wool or just stay bare. Becky laughed softly. Your daddy had a saying for everything. He did. Also would have said, don't get in a spitting contest with a skunk. But she started the spitting. So, as the last light faded from the sky, Kennedy made a decision. He pulled out his phone and typed a brief statement for release the next morning. The events of this week's hearing should serve not as celebration, but as education. Public service demands more than passion. It requires preparation, more than ideology. It requires ideas, more than performance. It requires purpose. I hope Congresswoman Ocasio-Cortez finds her way back to genuine service. Her constituents deserve nothing less. As for me, I'll be getting back to the quiet work of governance. The cameras can find someone else to follow. He showed it to Becky, who nodded approvingly. Still teaching, even after the lesson's over. Someone needs to show these young folks that winning isn't the point. Serving is the point. Maybe if we focused less on destroying each other and more on building something together. He trailed off, knowing it was probably wishful thinking. Washington would continue its cycles of combat and chaos. Social media would crown new heroes and create new villains. The performance would go on. But maybe, just maybe, one young congresswoman would remember this week and choose substance over style, service over celebrity, truth over tweets. It wasn't much to hope for. But it was something. As if reading his thoughts. Becky asked, do you think she'll actually change? Kennedy considered the question, rocking slowly in his chair. People can surprise you. I've seen folks hit rock bottom and climb back up stronger. I've also seen them dig deeper holes. The choice is hers now. His phone buzzed again. This time it was a message from an unexpected source. His Democratic colleague, Senator Amy Klobuchar. John watched the hearing. Harsh, but necessary. Sometimes our side needs tough love. 2. Respect. C. Kennedy showed the message to Becky. Maybe something good can come from this. Maybe both sides can remember that competence matters more than charisma. That knowledge matters more than noise. A shooting star stray across the Louisiana sky. And Kennedy made a quiet wish. Not for himself, but for the young woman whose career he had just ended. He wished her wisdom, humility, and the courage to rebuild herself into someone worthy of the trust placed in her. You know what he said to Becky? I think I'll call Boston University tomorrow. See about setting up a scholarship fund for economics students from working-class backgrounds. Real economics education, not the participation trophy kind. Maybe help create some representatives who actually understand what they're voting on. Becky smiled. turning destruction into construction. Your daddy would approve. He would, wouldn't he? Kennedy smiled back. He always said, Johnny, any fool can tear down a barn. Takes a real man to build one. As they headed inside for dinner, Kennedy took one last look at the stars. Somewhere in New York, a young congresswoman was facing the hardest night of her life. But sometimes he knew the hardest nights led to the brightest dawns. The hearing was over. The reckoning was complete. Now came the harder work of rebuilding. Not just for Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, but for a political system that had allowed passion to replace preparation performance. To override purpose. And Twitter followers to matter more than the constituents who needed real help. In the end, Senator John Kennedy had done what he did best. He had taught a lesson. Whether anyone would learn from it remained to be seen. But in the quiet of a Louisiana evening, with his wife by his side, and his conscience clear, he had done his duty. The Southern gentleman had shown that sometimes the greatest act of grace is refusing to let someone continue down a destructive path. Sometimes mercy looks like destruction. And sometimes, just sometimes, being torn down is the only way to truly build yourself back up. As he closed the door behind him, Kennedy murmured a prayer for the young woman he had destroyed and the constituents she had failed. Tomorrow would bring new battles, new hearings, new confrontations between the old and the new. But tonight there was peace in knowing that truth, patient, methodical, devastating truth, still had power in a world drowning in carefully crafted lies. The last light faded over Louisiana, drawing the curtain on one of the most remarkable days in American political history. The revolution had indeed been televised. But the real revolution, the one that mattered, would happen quietly, personally in the choices made by a broken young woman with everything to rebuild. And maybe, just maybe, that was exactly the revolution America needed.